We need to talk about inheritance, not in the abstract way lawyers do, but in the real way families face it. You are either preparing to leave something behind or standing on the edge of receiving what someone else spent their life building. If you are leaving it, you may be asking, how much is enough? How do I set conditions that make my children stronger rather than weaker? How do I protect them without creating the very conflict that tears brothers and sisters apart? If you are receiving it, the questions are different. How do I accept this gift without losing myself? How do I turn money into capacity instead of into an excuse to stop trying? How do I honor my parents without being trapped by their shadow? The truth is, inheritance is not evil in itself. It can be a blessing or a curse. What matters is design. Aristotle teaches us that money must serve virtue and balance. Nietzsche warns us that without struggle, the will shrinks. Together, they give us a way to engineer inheritance so that wealth passed down becomes a weight that builds strength, not a burden that crushes it. We like to tell ourselves that inheritance is the final gift of love. A parent works, saves, sacrifices, and then, at the end, hands it all down. But Aristotle would stop us there. He would ask, what kind of gift is it if it destroys the very virtue that makes a life worth living? And Nietzsche, sharper still, would say, are you sure you are not robbing your child of the one thing they need most, the chance to fight their own battles? Inheritance is not just numbers in a will or property in a trust. It is a transfer of habits, of fears, of unspoken expectations. When money arrives without design, it can quietly unmake the very people it was meant to protect. So the real question is not, should you leave money or should you accept it? The real question is, how do you shape it so it creates strength instead of decay? This video will not tell you to give nothing. It will not tell you to throw wealth away. It will show you the hidden mechanics that turn inheritance into a curse, and the principles from Aristotle and Nietzsche that can reframe inheritance into something that builds character and preserves freedom. The trouble with inheritance is not hard to see. Too much, and children lose the hunger that makes them grow. Too little, and they feel abandoned, cut off from opportunity. Families fracture over property lines. Brothers and sisters, once close, stop speaking for years because of a house or a bank account. Spouses and in-laws step in, and loyalty shifts. Even for the heir who receives without conflict, there is another burden: guilt, anxiety, and confusion. They spend to numb the feeling. They switch jobs again and again. They grow cautious, afraid of risk, because every move seems weighted with what they owe the past. So the central question is this: how do you design inheritance so it does not kill the very struggle that makes character? How do you give enough to be a safety net, but not so much that you erase the need for courage, discipline, and judgment? Aristotle would say, money is a tool. Without moderation, it ruins practical wisdom. Nietzsche would warn, without resistance, without tests of strength, the will shrinks and decay begins. Too little breaks the wings. Too much makes wings unnecessary. Aristotle never believed money was evil. He saw it as a tool, one instrument among many in the orchestra of a good life. But he warned, again and again, that when a tool becomes the master, human character bends out of shape. In his Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle argued that true happiness, what he called eudaimonia, is not a feeling and it is not a possession. It is the activity of living in accordance with virtue. That means building habits of courage, discipline, and justice through daily choices. Money can support this, but money alone cannot create it. Aristotle's doctrine of the golden mean is crucial here. Every virtue, he said, lies between two extremes. Courage sits between cowardice and recklessness. Generosity, or liberality, sits between stinginess and wastefulness. Even magnificence, spending on large projects, has a noble form when it is aimed at the right end, and a corrupt form when it becomes vanity. The problem with inheritance is that it tilts the balance. Too much money waiting in the wings pushes heirs toward the excess. Waste, vanity, arrogance. Too little drives them toward deficiency, fear, resentment, pettiness. And this is where Aristotle's most practical concept comes in: phronesis, or practical wisdom. Unlike theoretical knowledge, practical wisdom is forged only by making real choices and feeling real consequences. You cannot inherit it. You cannot be gifted it in a will. It comes from being tested by uncertainty, making judgments, sometimes failing and learning through the weight of outcomes. Aristotle also wrote in Politics about the difference between oikonomia, household management, using wealth for the good of life, and crematistics, the pursuit of money as an end in itself. A family that hands down wealth without handing down discipline turns oikonomia into crematistics. Money shifts from being a servant of life into being the ruler of life. And once that shift happens, decline begins before the fortune is even spent. So what would Aristotle advise a parent writing a will or a son receiving one? He would insist that inheritance must serve virtue, not vanity. It must create space for judgment, not shield from it. That means putting boundaries on the gift, designing it so that the heir still meets the hard edge of reality. A practical design looks like this: a cap, enough for 2 or 3 years of basic living costs, plus education or training, and a small amount of seed capital. Not enough to retire forever, just enough to walk into the world with tools in hand, but still feel the sting of failure if choices are foolish. Release funds by milestones, not by age. For example, completing a degree or certificate, living debt-free for a period, or demonstrating consistent work. Tie distributions to virtue conditions. Proven financial discipline, service to the community, stewardship of health. If the heir burns through a portion recklessly, reduce the next distribution. Let money itself become a teacher by making it possible to fail. This is not cruelty. It is love in the form Aristotle would recognize, because without practice, the muscles of judgment never grow. Without contact with consequence, wisdom stays theoretical. Money that erases all risk also erases the very soil in which virtue takes root. Aristotle's one-liner might sound like this: money is a hammer. If you do not teach your child how to hold it, they will smash their own hand. Do not ask, how much can I give? Ask instead, how much will help virtue grow and how much will rot it from within? This is the way inheritance can honor Aristotle's vision. Wealth becomes an instrument for building character, not a shortcut that dissolves it. If Aristotle reminds us that money must be tempered by virtue, Nietzsche reminds us that life itself must be tempered by struggle. To him, the greatest danger of inheritance is not the presence of wealth, but the absence of challenge. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche introduces 2 images that haunt every parent thinking about legacy. The first is the Übermensch, the overman, the one who creates values out of his own strength. The second is the last man, a creature who prefers comfort, avoids risk, and settles into mediocrity. The last man yawns and says, "We invented happiness." He avoids pain, avoids growth, avoids greatness. Inheritance, if designed poorly, is the factory that produces last men. Nietzsche was not writing about estates and trusts. He was writing about the human spirit. But the translation is simple. When wealth shields a person from risk, it shields them from becoming. When the road is paved too smooth, the muscles of will atrophy. Without friction, there is no strength. Without risk, there is no courage. Without resistance, there is no meaning. In On the Genealogy of Morals, Nietzsche explained how resentment festers when people avoid struggle and instead redefine weakness as virtue. Inheritance can feed this disease. An heir afraid of loss turns cautious, then resentful. They preserve what exists rather than daring to create. The will to power, The drive to shape reality shrinks into the will to maintain. The spark that could have lit a new fire becomes the smoke of fear. In Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche described nobility not as privilege, but as self-assertion, the ability to say yes to life on one's own terms. You cannot buy this, you cannot sign it over in a will. It has to be earned in combat with reality. A fortune that comes too easily robs the heir of that combat. It hands them a shield without ever forcing them to carry a sword. So how do you design an inheritance that resists decadence? Nietzsche would demand that it includes points of pain, points of resistance, moments where the heir must prove strength. That means creating a rite of passage. 6 months to a year without family money, a period of real work, travel, or building a venture. Keeping a daily journal of fears, failures, and lessons. This is not symbolic. It is the ground where self-overcoming takes root. He would also insist on what we might call earned match. The family does not simply pour money into ideas. It matches only real profit, not revenue, not dreams. If the heir makes $10,000 in net earnings, the family can match it. If they burn cash on vanity projects, there is no refill. This forces skin in the game, forces reality to remain a teacher. Nietzsche would set rules of transparency, quarterly reports to a family council, not to humiliate, but to cultivate responsibility and courage. He would reward bold attempts, not timid preservation. The heir must be willing to risk, to fail, to rise again, because that is what he called amor fati, the love of fate. And there is the eternal test Nietzsche left us, the thought experiment of eternal recurrence. Imagine making a decision and then living that decision over and over for eternity. Would you still choose it? This is a brutal filter for heirs who think of inheritance as easy money. It asks, if you had to relive this spending, this investment, this path 1,000 times, would you still want it? If the answer is no, it is not worthy of your life. Nietzsche's one-liners sting because they cut straight to the nerve. Do not give your child a result. Give them a worthy battle to win. If inheritance has no pain, it will create weak people. If wealth takes away every risk, it takes away the possibility of greatness. The point of inheritance, in Nietzsche's eyes, is not comfort. It is fuel. It is the raw material your child must shape through their will, their choices, their struggles. The danger is decadence, the slow decay of the spirit through comfort. The opportunity is destiny, the sharpening of the spirit through resistance. Aristotle teaches us to measure and moderate wealth so virtue can grow. Nietzsche demands that we engineer struggle so will can grow. Together they give us a blueprint for inheritance that strengthens instead of softens, that creates heirs who are authors of their lives, not footnotes to a fortune. Why does inheritance so often break the very people it was meant to protect? Why do stories of family wealth so frequently end in division, waste, or weakness? Aristotle and Nietzsche give us two separate chains of cause and effect, and when you put them together, the picture is brutal. Aristotle shows us the slow erosion of judgment. When resources are always present, a son or daughter is spared the weight of consequences. They never have to sharpen phronesis. That practical wisdom forged only by facing real stakes. Without scarcity, without setbacks, decisions become shallow. Choices lose their gravity. The heir can spend, hire, or indulge without ever meeting the edge of reality. That absence of feedback weakens their compass. Nietzsche pushes even deeper. He warns that comfort without challenge doesn't just blur judgment, it shrinks the will. When wealth removes friction, the heir no longer needs to push, climb, or fight. The muscles of power and courage atrophy. Instead of risk-takers, you get protectors. Instead of creators, you get maintainers. They become what he called last men, safe, dull, content with mediocrity. Put these two together and you have the core mechanism. Excess inheritance without design creates both a deficit of wisdom and a deficit of will. No phronesis, no will to power. Money becomes a cushion that numbs instead of a tool that sharpens. The heir has resources but not resilience, wealth but not weight, a name but not a spine. That is why poorly designed inheritance so often destroys character. It delivers safety while stripping away the very struggles that make a person strong. The paradox is simple and devastating. The gift meant to secure the future can quietly hollow it out. One line sums it up. Inheritance, if left unchecked, transforms heirs from authors of their lives into managers of a lifestyle. Let's ground the philosophy in faces and stories, because behind every abstract warning is a living example. 3 families, 3 different outcomes, all linked by the same hidden mechanics Aristotle and Nietzsche warned us about. Case 1, the heir who kept starting over. He was 28. His parents provided $12,000 a month in trust income. On paper, it was freedom. In reality, it became a trap. He launched 5 different projects in 3 years. A cafe, an app, a clothing line, each folded within months. Why? Because none of them required discipline. He never had skin in the game. Losses were absorbed by the cushion. Aristotle would say his phronesis never formed. He never had to feel the weight of a true consequence. Nietzsche would say his will shrank into comfort. Without real stakes, he became a wanderer, not a builder. Case 2, 2 sisters and the family home. Their mother's will left the family house to both of them to share. It sounded fair. It became a nightmare. One husband pushed to sell, the other wanted to rent. 2 years of legal battles followed. Holidays turned cold. The problem wasn't the amount of money, it was the absence of design. Aristotle reminds us that justice is not abstract. It has to be practical, with clear rules. When a charter or neutral trust is missing, resentment breeds. Here, inheritance created fracture where there should have been unity. Case 3, the late inheritor. At 55, after decades of modest living, he suddenly received $600,000 when his father passed. Instead of peace, it triggered guilt. He felt he had not earned it. He spent heavily on gifts, travel, and impulsive donations. Within 3 years, most was gone. Nietzsche would say he never stepped out of his father's shadow. The money did not become a tool for creation, but a weight of obligation he tried to spend away. Without rules to bind and tests to pass, the gift dissolved. Case 4, the family obsessed with appearances. One wealthy couple left a sprawling estate. Their children turned it into a stage. Luxury cars, oversized homes, constant upgrades. Soon the debt outpaced the income. Every choice was about status, not substance. Aristotle would call it a collapse of moderation, a life pulled away from telos, the true end of wealth, which is to live well. Nietzsche would call it decadence, energy redirected from growth into display. Different families, different ages, same pattern. Without structure, inheritance doesn't just transfer assets, it transfers illusions, and illusions tear people apart. Here's the hard truth. Inheritance never fails because of the money itself. It fails because the philosophy behind it was missing. So what do you do if you are the one preparing to pass down wealth? Or if you are the one about to receive it? The answer cannot be vague. It must be engineered. Aristotle gives us a framework of virtue and moderation. Nietzsche pushes us to build trial and resistance into the process. Together they form 2 playbooks, one for the giver, one for the receiver. A. The playbook for parents and grantors. Your goal is not simply to hand over money. Your goal is to pass down the conditions where virtue can grow and will can sharpen. That requires design. Start with the Aristotle chapter. That means setting a ceiling, not everything you have, not just a little. a precise number that covers 24 to 36 months of basic living costs, the cost of essential education or skill training, and a modest seed fund. Enough to give stability, not enough to erase struggle. Aristotle would call this the golden mean, the balance between too little and too much. Second, the milestone release. Do not transfer in one lump sum. Release assets at moments tied to real consequences. Finishing a professional certification. Living independently for 2 years without debt. Showing 3 years of consistent work. These are not arbitrary hoops. They are practical tests of phronesis, the virtue of sound judgment that only emerges through lived responsibility. Third, build virtue conditions. Attach release to measurable behaviors, financial discipline, health commitments, community service. Aristotle was clear. Virtue is not inherited, it is habituated. If the money comes without habit, it corrupts. Fourth, consequence clauses. If a poor decision leads to reckless loss, the next release is reduced. This is not punishment, it is feedback. A mirror of the real economy where actions carry weight. Layer on Nietzsche's principles. The earned match means you only match profits, never promises. If your child builds something and earns a surplus, you match it dollar for dollar. If they only propose ideas, no match. This ensures their will is tested by reality, not cushioned by theory. Skin in the game means they must risk at least 20 to 30% of their own time or capital in every project. No stake, no support. Finally, build a family charter. A short document, 5 pages, where the family writes down its values, conflict rules, and boundaries. Aristotle called for justice with equity, rules that adjust to context. Nietzsche warned against hiding behind comfort. A charter prevents silent assumptions from turning into bitter lawsuits. Write it, sign it, live by it. One line that sums it up. You are not leaving money, you are leaving a training ground. Be the playbook for heirs. If you are on the receiving end, the temptation is to relax. Resist it. You must reframe inheritance from cushion into crucible. Start with a rite of passage. Give yourself 6 to 12 months away from family money. Work a real job. Travel with limits. Start a project with your own small savings. Keep a daily journal. Nietzsche reminds us, strength only comes from friction. Without a proving ground, you will never escape the shadow. Next, do a time for money audit. Count how many hours of your week are traded purely for income. Then ask, what would I do if money was not the driver? This builds clarity about telos, the true purpose Aristotle said should guide life. Follow with the anti-decadence diet. For 90 days, cut 1 subscription. Delete 1 app that feeds envy. Delay every non-essential purchase by 72 hours. This small discipline recalibrates desire. Nietzsche called convenience the breeding ground of decay. Build your own personal P&L. Every quarter, write down income, expenses, debt, investments, lessons. Not just numbers, but reflections. If you cannot account for money, money will account for you. Adopt the no lifestyle inflation rule. For 12 months after receiving inheritance, freeze your lifestyle. Same home, same car, same spending. The rule forces you to strengthen your will before expanding your consumption. Finally, commit to meaning reinvestment. Direct 1 to 2% of inherited assets into something that transcends you. Community service, craft, time with family. Aristotle said, virtue is lived in community. Nietzsche said the highest will creates beyond the self. Put your money where meaning lives. The key phrase to remember, you are not your inheritance. You are what you build with it. When these 2 playbooks align, one from the parent, one from the heir, inheritance transforms. It stops being a cushion that erodes strength. It becomes a structure that demands growth. That is how wealth is passed down without passing down weakness. Whenever inheritance is discussed with limits and conditions, the same objections rise. They sound compassionate, but beneath them lies confusion about love, virtue, and strength. The first objection, placing conditions, means you don't trust or love your children. Aristotle would shake his head. Love is not the same as indulgence. True love equips a person with the tools to live well. Conditions are not cages. They are scaffolding that helps the character grow straight. Unconditional transfer without guidance is not love. It is abandonment disguised as generosity. The second objection, a cap on wealth is unfair. My children deserve all that I earned. Aristotle again answers, excess destroys judgment. Phronesis, practical wisdom, does not grow in soil watered with endless abundance. A ceiling is not punishment, it is protection, a safeguard to keep virtue alive. The third objection, my son or daughter is different. They don't need hardship. Nietzsche would laugh darkly. No one is immune from decadence. The will shrinks when comfort becomes the constant air we breathe. Shielding a child from challenge is not faith in them. It is a quiet admission that you fear they cannot rise. Hardship is not an enemy. It is the invitation to strength. The fourth objection, all these charters and rules sound heavy and bureaucratic. But heavy compared to what? Lawsuits among siblings? Silent dinners where families no longer speak? A written charter is weighty, yes, but it weighs less than a family broken apart. Quick line to anchor. Signing a check is easy. Signing a character is hard. Yet only the second gives meaning to the first. Philosophy without practice dies as words. Aristotle and Nietzsche did not write so their thoughts could sit on a shelf. They wrote to change how human beings live. If inheritance is to become a gift of strength, not a curse of weakness, it needs structure. A time-bound program that transforms good intentions into lived reality. Here is how the first 90 days can look. 0 to 30 days. Discovery and groundwork. Begin with clarity. Draft a family charter, 5 pages at most. Write down the values that money should serve. Work, moderation, courage, fairness. Write the rules for conflict. A neutral council, majority vote, no public boasting. This becomes the compass. Alongside, run an audit. Track every subscription, every status purchase, every hidden debt. Confront the truth. Choose a mentor outside the family. Someone who has no stake in your wealth, only in your growth. Book the first quarterly review. 31 to 60 days, design and installation. Now move from words to architecture. Set up an incentive trust. Distributions tied to life milestones, not to birthdays. Insert virtue conditions, basic financial discipline, health commitments, service hours. Add a consequence clause. Losses from recklessness reduce future distributions. Apply an Aristotle cap. Enough for growth, never enough for permanent rest. Pair this with Nietzsche's rules. Match only net gains created by the heir. Require skin in the game. At least 20 to 30% of any project funded by the recipient. Establish a philanthropic fund with a sunset clause. It dissolves in 20 years, forcing renewal. Build a 90-day delay rule for any purchase above a set threshold. 61 to 90 days, pilot and feedback. Now test the system. Launch a rite of passage. 6 to 12 months in real work, travel, or a venture started without family funds. Produce the first personal or family P&L. List revenues, expenses, debt, and lessons. Measure the key indicators: new skills acquired, hours freed for meaningful work, proportion of personal capital in each project, anxiety score compared to baseline. Hold a family meeting. Adjust the caps, milestones, and clauses not by theory, but by data. Aristotle taught that money is only a tool. Without moderation, it corrupts judgment and erodes phronesis. the practical wisdom needed to steer a life. Nietzsche warned that without struggle, the will shrinks and comfort decays into weakness. Inheritance, then, is never just a transfer of wealth. It is a transfer of character. It can be a torch that lights the next path or a velvet cage that locks the next generation inside. So the question is not whether you should leave money. The question is how you design it. Will it sharpen virtue and ignite will, or will it flatten challenge and breed dependence? The choice is yours, long before the will is read. If you are planning to pass something down, or if you expect to receive it, leave a comment below. Tell me what you believe is the hardest part about inheritance. Keeping family unity, building discipline, or avoiding dependence. I read every comment and may build the next video around your answers. And stay tuned for the next chapter, where we break down practical frameworks, real-world examples, and the hidden traps families never see coming.